blow you out of the water here. Thank you. It's been an honor to be asked to speak here today. I guess I want to kind of prerequisite this. I heard this the other day here, and an original thought is usually a forgotten source. So
just so he can see it.
Pretty much anything I say today is something that I've either gleaned from someone else or found that works on my place, but I've heard it someplace before, and I don't mean to try to take it from anyone else. As Daryl said, I'm Dave Bauer. My wife is Tanya, and my oldest is Hunter and Trayton, and my young daughter Olivia. I used to, like I said, farm and ranch with my dad and brother. They helped me out with a lot of the extra work during haying season, that kind of thing, and working the cattle. And then I helped them harvesting and that kind of thing. This year's been interesting in all aspects of that, I guess. I kind of do the ranching side. In our area, we have large areas there. Farmers call it wasteland. I would like to get that kind of changed at NRCS, you know, because I don't think any land is wasted. But oftentimes, even when you get your maps, they'll hash out everything I want to see. And they say, well, these are your croplands. Yeah, I know. But anyway, so I do that, the hash part is the part I take care of then. I was born and raised on a hog farm. My dad was one of the very first confinement hog operations in North Dakota. He had actually kind of trained the bankers and teach them how to even do loans for hog operations, in fact. And so that's kind of the background I grew up with is hogs and working with animals every day. And anybody that's worked with hogs knows that their head is always on the wrong end. And but they are a good animal. I like hogs. But when Tyson and the bigger packers started moving into these kind of plants, then they got the hog price down to about $9 a hundredweight, and it was just, you're working all year. We made good money during deer season because we sold right off the farm, and that worked out pretty well, but it was just like, yeah, you're working all year just for a 1 month sort of income. So we got out of the hogs, and I went to NDSU, graduated from NDSU, Bison. They did well this last weekend. I bought my first cattle in '99, and so I guess coming from the hog background, I didn't think I had too many paradigms as far as the old, not coming from a generational ranch, so to speak, where you have a whole lot of ideas. But I still calved in March. My rotational grazing consisted of moving them like 3 times through the summer. I used insecticides on the cattle. I used grain, creep feed, all kinds of things. In 2011, oh, I need the clicker, I guess. That's it? Okay. In 2011, I met these holistic management gurus here. Ken, I'm sure you recognize some of these people here. And just wanted to say, you know, it's people like these that you learn from. Alan Savory, of course, and Ken Miller, Josh Dukart, Gerald Fry. I got to see him speak. Steve Campbell is kind of taking over his. Gabe Brown. I actually took Gabe's spot, I believe, on the soil conservation board there. So these people are just a wealth of knowledge, and if you can ever take a second to get some more information from them, it's always a good thing to do. Like I said, I took my first classes in 2011. One of them was from Ian Mitchell Innes, and his was really interesting, but I wanted a little bit more depth into the financial part, and he did do that, but it probably went a lot over my head because it was the first time I'd ever seen it. So I was able to take another one from Josh then that fall. I think Cody Sand and I were in the same class, I believe, and that just completely changed my view and my outlook on how I do things. It helped me analyze and classify my different financial structures. It helped me to look at cattle not as something you're married to, but as a source of income. Made me look at my land as something that you can improve and get ahead and do better with, and help you look at your management goals. If you even if you're not ranching, I believe that holistic management will teach you that if you're all rowing in the right direction or the same direction, you're going to get someplace a lot faster than if everybody's pulling in a different direction. But one thing about holistic management, if you're not willing to do it, it's not going to help you out. You can. I took 2 of them, and I've actually taken another one since with my wife. So, as long as you're not willing to make the changes, think about it, continue to do it, then it's not going to help you. I mean, you've got to go from the class and go back and say, I'm going to change what I'm doing. I think it was Chad. I heard him speak here, I think last year, and he was saying that if you don't use your, if you start to use your head to think instead of a billboard for your bank, you'll be a lot better off. So I thought that was pretty good. This is my actual home section. I live on a section that my dad owns. There are 2. It's the hashed out area is mine, or my area. It's about 50 acres. This is kind of deceptive. Where I live, it's about 6 miles in every direction. It's beautiful cropland. I mean, it's Williams Loam, relatively flat. About the only areas that are pasture are gravel patches and too wet to farm areas. So when I got this place, I thought, well, maybe I could have about 100 head, just to kind of take care of our lower ground areas and utilize it that way, and I'll just kind of be kind of going along, you know. And I bought some cattle, trying to find some cattle that were well adapted to grass, more grass genetics. So I met a man named Henry Meyer, and he came up to check out how his heifers were doing on my place, and really interesting fella. And he come up, and he was driving up to my place, and he's like, holy cow. He says, you could have 700 head on this place. And in my mind, I was thinking I could have 100. He's like, look at all this ground around you. They're only using this land just a few months out of the year. I mean, get some more cattle out here. So that's all a good thing and a bad thing. I can't really be grass finished because my big advantage is aftermath grazing of my croplands. Now, if I can get more farmers probably to switch to grass, that'd be a better idea. But and the other disadvantage is that my summer pastures are about 6 miles away from my place. So my place is actually about in the middle. I have pastures 10 miles north and 7 miles south. So I'm kind of stretched out. So that's one thing I don't like, but I do like, I guess. So it gives me advantage in the wintertime. This is a picture that I took in the 24th. This is generally where I move them. I generally try to move my cattle about the middle of April. I get them moved south to my pasture grounds so that I don't have to move them. It's way easier to move a cow that's bred than a cow and get her calf matched up and get them moved. I don't do any tagging. I spent an hour underneath my four-wheeler one day and and I come to the realization that tagging isn't anything you really need to do, and the cows don't generally like you to do it. So, so I figured, you know what, I'm getting a little too old for this. So I decided to quit tagging that day, and I haven't done it since. Now I'll still tag once in a while if I know there's one that I think I really like the genetics on, or I really like the calf or something. I'll do some tagging then, but in generally I don't tag until I'm going to keep a heifer, and then I will tag her when I run them through the chute. Like I said, this was in May. We had pretty late year this year. It was pretty cloudy and rainy. So I had actually had them up in another pasture further north than this, and I was going to just move them through this pasture fairly slow. It's about a 250 acre pasture, and I was just going to kind of get them moved. They had already started calving, so moving them slowly with the week and day old calves is a lot easier. So I was going to move them through this pasture. It's about a mile long, and I also wanted to nip off the cool season grasses so that it would show up with the warm season grasses could show themselves a little more, because it generally was always grazed from June 1st to July 1st. That's how the gentleman that had it before me always did it, and then oddly enough that's kind of how I kept doing it, and I was like, no, I can't do that this year, but just slowly move them through. That's what I wanted to do. What I then started doing is I wanted to try, and I heard of instead of fencing everything, to do herding, more of a herding type thing. I can't remember his name, but he shows how he'll herd 1,000 head, and he'll just to get them go up a draw or something like that, take them to water in the morning and then move them away. They're doing it in large acreages down in Texas and Mexico and stuff like that, and I thought, hey, I'll give it a try because they're only going to be in this part for a week. This is actually just a picture I took. It's not that same day, but this is kind of how was trying to do it. This was actually later in the year in a different picture, but it helps me. And what I would do is I'd try to move them, and then you'd try to just kind of do your planning and your monitoring and your controlling and looking at the grass as you're doing. This wasn't exactly in my plan, but it kind of sounds like an excuse. And then that kind of got me to this picture again, Ken, because I realized where this picture was in your profile here. I don't know if you've been on Ken's ranch or if anybody was here when Alan Savory was here, but he was on that place, and it's the funniest thing. He was standing out in the middle of this big salt flat, and Ken was saying, well, this is the different areas, and this is one of the problem situations that we get into is the alkali, and it's evaporating instead of transpirating. So then Alan Savory goes, well, this is kind of how we do it. What we want to do is we want to get a whole bunch of cattle on this, get a bunch of hoof action, get that crust broken up. Maybe you want to feed something on here so you get some vegetation on here. Then it'll get some carbon into the soil. Everything will get good, and then after a few years, maybe you'll just get weeds growing for a few years, but after a while it'll recuperate. And he no more than got done with that, and he goes, well, is there any questions about a situation like this? And the gentleman standing right beside me goes, yeah, how do you get rid of like a big salt flat like what you're in? And Alan Savory just looked at me, he goes, well, audience, what do you think? What do you think you should do? And everybody goes, well, you should probably get cattle on there and move and get some hoof action. And some other guys go, well, throw some hay out there. Remember that, Ken, when he said that? And he goes, no, that's not what you should do. Because he said, maybe on this ranch, he doesn't have the cattle to put on this. Or maybe this isn't the worst spot on his ranch, so he's got to concentrate someplace else. And that's when it hit me. You need an excuse. You don't need an excuse. You need a reason. See, Ken isn't somebody that doesn't have a reason for what he's doing. That salt flat wasn't the worst spot on his place, so he didn't need to remedy that spot right now. So I figured I'd look it up for you. An excuse is an explanation, or excuse is an explanation put forward to defend or justify a fault, and it's pretty much the same thing in the active term. It's an attempt to lessen a blame attached to a fault. A reason is the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by the process of logic. And the active is that your mind can do. The power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by the power of logic. So it's not that I'm doing things completely wrong. Most of the time, I've thought of the stuff I'm doing. It's just sometimes you just can't get to everything all at one time. And also, sometimes you haven't thought about it, and then you do come up with excuses. But once you find out that that's something you need to look at, then you can actually analyze and think about it. This part here was my plan in May. Is there a... Yeah. Well, right about in the middle, right next to the edge there, you can see I've got a water source. The red and white hashed marks there, that goes on both sides of the road. My plan was, I had talked to a well driller, and well, you're the closest guy that we've got. We're going to be there. You're the first well. So boy, I was excited. I was thinking, boy, I'm going to really nail this thing down. And they were going to be out there, and it rained, and it started raining, and it's kind of down on a hill. So they got there, and they were first. They got the well drilled in May, and I thought, okay, May, I'm doing pretty good. I should have my tanks in by middle of June. And then I should probably get them to the west side of the road here by July, and then I'll have these tanks up on top of the hill. On the other side of the road, that split in the middle is actually a quarter line. So I had it burrowed under the ground and to put it up on top of a hill on the other side. So I figured, well, I'm moving my cattle through that pasture. They were going to be down into this pasture on the left side of your picture there, and that's an entire mile long there also, and it's kind of a low ground, and so I figured, well, I'll run them in through there, and by that time I'm going to have water on this other side, and boy, it's going to be good. So that didn't work, and I'll get into it. but that was my plan, and that's how I thought things were going to work out this year. When Trish asked me to do this today, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. No, the way this year worked out, it's just not a good time for me to show you what I can do. The more I thought about it, everybody, you learn more from your mistakes a lot of times than you do your victories. So I thought, you know what? They won't ask me again if I do it right now, so I don't have to keep going over this. So I'm getting into the charges, and I guess we kind of covered this already. But I got this charger. Well, actually, when I first met Ken, it was before I took holistic management at all. And he said, you know, if you start dividing your pastures up a little bit, you know, you're gonna just leaps and bounds, you're going to make your pastures better. So I went out and bought the cheapest farm store generator charger you could find. Got some, the step-in posts were too expensive, so I just bought rebar and 4 insulators, put the thing up, and those cattle walked through that thing like nothing. And I was like, well, that don't work here, you know. And so it took me a little while, and then Ken goes, well, you got to have some power behind that charger. So So then I went, kind of researched a little bit, and at the time, this 2500 MBX, it's got a remote, so I can turn it on and off from no matter where it is. I think it's supposed to do 200 miles of fence. It's 25 joules, so you know when you touch it. I actually bought 2 of them when I did it because I have kind of 2 separate herds because there's too much of a distance. So I bought 2 of them. One of them had to shut off and one don't. And by golly, you kind of forget which one you're dealing with at what's going on. So that's never good. Another thing I like to do is I like to have a fault finder. They're kind of expensive. But if you're dealing with a few miles of fence and if you go back, what I generally do is I will take a charger and go around the perimeter of the entire fence with high tensile wire, and then what I can do is go with aircraft cable and go back and forth in between there and just step it off. And so I like to have the power all around the outside all the time, and then I just divide off on the inside with poly wire. Most people use poly wire. I use an aircraft cable because I was dealing with a lot longer stretches. The other thing is good grounding. In like this area here, we've got really good, it's a lower area, it's watery. So I put in several grounding rods, 3, 4. A lot of times I'll put them like on the edge of the drip line on a building if I have the charger in a building. The thing is you kind of want to think of it as like TV reception. Well, I'm old enough to know rabbit ears on TVs anyway. The antenna, the better antenna you have sticking in the ground for your ground, the better the circuit will be made for your cattle and the better shock you get out of it. These are the ring top posts I use. I figured I better get some pictures. It's snowy. Usually you don't use them in the winter, but they do work in the winter. In the wintertime, I generally just don't push them in quite so far. That little foot feet, if you push it in too far, it freezes, and then you have a much more difficult, well, then you end up breaking the plastic foot feet is what you do. But usually I'll stick it in, and then you can kick that foot feet, that kind of loosens it up, and you can pull them right out. But I like these ring top posts. These are actually Gallagher also, but I'm kind of sound like I'm a salesman for them. But I like these because there's no metal on the inside of that ring. So with the cable that I use, as it saws back and forth with the wind, it doesn't eventually ground out. The other ones were just pigtail posts that had like a PVC covering, and when you'd be going along and then pick them up, you would find out how well your charger worked there too. So I like to use these years around, and they generally work really well. I've been really happy with how these work for me. This is my spool. It'll hold a mile. They get pretty heavy with a mile, but I would do about 4,000 feet. When I first started doing this, I had 2 quarters side by side, so it was a mile long. The water was about in the middle. Well, it wasn't in the middle, it was actually towards one end. So in order to do and that kind of how everybody, I think, that starts holistically, they'll start to they'll take their water source and go in a wagon wheel around it, and that's what I did on that, and it worked quite well. It's a heavy duty reel. I think it's from 7L in Canada. They sell them in the United States. There's distributors down here too, but that's how I found it. I think it's 3/16 inch aircraft cable, but it's really fine. It's the same size cable that trappers use for coyotes and stuff. The thing I don't like about it so much is it's somewhat hard to see when it's out there. But the other thing is, if you got a good charger on it, when you move your cattle through, after you've been using this cable for a while, when you move your cattle through, they don't take off like crazy. When I first started moving the cattle, you'd always have those, it was like a race when you'd open them up into a new pasture. When you use this cable, they don't quite know where that is, so they're always pretty timid when they're coming through there. They get trained pretty well. Like I said, good charger. I use like a drill to wind it up. You just pull that handle out and you squirt a little oil on each side of it. You use a drill. I could do 4,000-foot runs in about 20 minutes. I could take it down and put them up in 40 minutes. So I really enjoyed. That's a pretty good reel. They've got geared reels and stuff, but they don't have the strength behind to hold this much weight. They're probably 30, 40 pounds when there's that much cable on there. This one here is my old trusty. I've seen some outfits, four-wheelers, that you know, have all kinds of racks and different systems on there. I pretty much just got a square tube, 1-inch square tubing with those little, you can see it there, little clips. That reel just hooks right into it. I just throw the ring top posts on the side where my foot is, drive along. I'll go to one end, hook it on, I'll drive along, just step in the post. I don't even have to step them in. I'll just hook it onto the wire, stab it into the ground, and keep on going. I usually count to 12. It's kind of however far you want to do it, but that's how I can do it so quickly. Moving on, I guess maybe some of you probably do it a lot quicker than that, but I thought it was pretty quick. This is a thing I saw. Action is preceded by thinking. Thinking is to deliberate beforehand over future action and to reflect afterwards upon past action. Thinking, action are inseparable. This is Ludwig von Mises. He was 1881 to 1973. I thought that pretty interesting because it looks quite a bit like plan, monitor, control, and replan. That's Alan Savory's holistic management. They call it the feedback loop. Now I think, I didn't really go through the dates, but I think they were thinking of this. He was an economist. Alan Savory was doing this in the jungles of Zimbabwe, and how thinking can stretch over areas like that is just amazing to me. But I just saw that and I thought, boy, that's looks a lot like that. So I got this picture in here. As I mentioned earlier, I was using insecticides, doing all that kind of thing. What about predators? In this picture, you can see the nice, all the spider webs, and I'm sure there's all kinds of other insects out there that are preying on things. The other things I use for fly control now are the movement of the animals, trying to keep them moving. I hate to have them in there any more than a week. I usually try to move them every 3 days. The life cycle of most of the fly problems are about 14 days, so if you can keep them shorter than 7, usually you don't have that trouble so much. And the other thing is about 10% of your animals usually carry about 80% of your insect loads. So if you can get rid of that 10%, you're probably a lot better off there too. This was something I saw. It was funny because I just kind of run them into this pasture, and my salt feeder is just on top of the hill from where they are. That's kind of in the bottom, and I figured, well, I don't want them all right in the bottom there. So here all these cows come, and they just started licking up the ground. So sometimes maybe you don't need to give them everything they need all the time, but they'll find their own salt licks sometimes. So but I think there too, we're talking about the mineral, and you've got to be able to give them some mineral, because if they're not able to go from here to Mexico like they used to years ago, then you're holding them back from finding their own thing. So Now, Daryl, this is what good cows look like, they're black. But I guess I just found out they're not. So, but I guess the reason I wanted to put this up there is because, you know, it doesn't make any difference if they're black cows or red cows or longhorns or sheep or goats or whatever you want to do. You need to find out what's profitable, what works well on your land, what you enjoy doing, and try to make your living doing that. So this is a rye vetch sweet clover alfalfa mix that I planted in 16. I let it come back. I ate it. We put it. I hate it and actually just moved the bales to the end, I guess, and then I grazed it then that fall. And then I reseeded it to rye, vetch, and oats then in 17. This is June 16th of this year then. And these are full-grown cows. So it's amazing how high that vetch will grow. This is that same picture again, and I wanted to just demonstrate what my plan was, and you can see all the grain fields, the water was supposed to be up at the top of the field there on the left side of the picture there. And then I was going to use my cables to divide each one of those fields all up. I was able to do some of it, but since I didn't have water in there yet, you can see up in the upper corner there, I had a solar well that I kind of set up a rig on an old grain truck, use a 1,600 gallon tank on that, and then as a bulk tank, and then solar panels, and then I'll fill that 1,600 gallon tank that goes down into just a regular normal tank, and then they fill that up. But it doesn't usually work very well for me in the winter, but I guess if we use more panels, I would be better off. I like this. This is pretty much the same picture again, but a little different angle. But I like the idea of using different kinds of cover crops and mixes. And I think that's a place where farming and ranching can kind of really get hooked together. My neighbor, he ended up doing, it wasn't this kind of cover crop. What he did is he was seeding a cover crop, and then he fed it in through his seeder with oats. So then what he ended up doing then was he was going to just bale it, and then he had it, and then he got into it, and he realized how much oats was actually there. So he took the oats, he waited a week, he harvested the oats, let the aftermath come off. I think he ended up with about 100 bushel oats on that field, and then he ran his cattle on that and through late fall and into winter, and he actually fed bales out onto that land, and he says they still haven't touched those bales. So I haven't talked to him lately here, but that was about 2 weeks ago. He said they still haven't touched those bales. They're still eating that cover crop underneath. So interseeding and something like that is also something I think would be a really interesting aspect that I'm going to try to continue on with. In areas like this that have lots of, that's a cropland area too. This is my other setup. This is a different pasture here. This is almost all native ground. I've been doing this. There also is kind of a wagon wheel sort of setup. Far in there you can see I've got a large stainless steel tank, which is also a bulk tank, solar panel, and I fill that bulk tank, and then it just drops into another tank. To the left of that fence post there it's native, but it wasn't grazed at all the year before, so there was a lot of old growth. And this was about June 5th when I got them into this part. So there's a lot of old growth, but there was a lot of young growth underneath, so they were getting a pretty good ration. This is all rented land. None of it is mine, so you hate to stick a whole lot of money into, not that you want to do poorly on someone else's land, but you don't want to go broke either trying to do infrastructure things. This is just an 8-foot long drill stem. It's a single hot wire fence. There too, just have a good chargers. They really respect that wire. When they have good grass, you don't generally have to worry so much about how it works. And one thing I did learn is that if they start to try to eat underneath that wire, they've been there too long, because they respect that wire. If they start to get close to that wire and you see that they're starting to eat underneath that wire, they've been there too long. You got to get them moved, or you're going to really end up with trouble. That leads me to another idea that I don't know. I guess maybe I can. Whoop. Too many. Well, anyway, there, that cow there, I thought it was actually the death triangle there on her side. That's actually her tail, but they call it the death triangle, and it's the area on their left side between their ribs and their hip, that if that area gets too sunken in, they're not getting enough. That's the other way to recognize that your cows aren't getting enough where they're at. This in the background, you can see where the cows are. That was actually an old alfalfa field, and in the foreground there is native. That's kind of the wagon wheel form again, but as you can see there, they're kind of all down by this rock pile. That alfalfa field was actually cropland for years, and the gentleman that owns this land, he wanted it to be grass. He's organic producer, and so he planted it all to alfalfa and grass mix. But you can see down in that hole there is a big rock pile. Well, years ago, when you would plow all the time, that water would start to run through there, so that in these low areas they would pile all their rocks to try to slow down that water. Well, now that it's grass, you don't have to worry about that. So I thought that was a pretty neat picture to show that, you know, we're getting better. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
So you're going to spread all those rocks again?
That's a good idea. They say that the fungi uses those rocks. That would really get the neighbors talking, wouldn't it? You went out there just went, you know, what is he doing? He's trying to get his fungi to be able to distribute better. Yeah, that'd have everybody thinking. This one here I put in for to demonstrate weeds, I guess. This is an area. It's a small area. We've got 40-foot cedars. This is an area that's about 35 feet between the highline poles and the fence, between the fence and the road. So we're not able to get in there to seed it. So what we did is we got in there as well as we could. We seeded it to grass and alfalfa, and then I fenced it. Now we're hoping that by putting a heavy dose of hoof action in there, that we would be able to get this turned back. Pretty much it's wormwood, absinthe. If I could figure out how to teach people to make absinthe liquor, I would be rich. But this is just one of those areas, so it's almost like a path. Get these cattle to get that moved through. They say weeds will grow as deep as they grow tall. So I'm thinking the big part of this was if it's plowed ground, and it was like that for years, that is actually nature taking care of itself. It's tap rooting down into that soil. It's going to bust open that weed or ground or the hard pan underneath, and that way that's a cost I didn't have to put in. Nature put it there for me. So that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. This was just a nice. I'm moving them north. to another section, and I was just running them along the road, and I just took that picture. I just thought it was pretty nice. There's actually a fence up there, or a gate up there on the left side of that, and those are actually hay fields that I had hayed. I took the hay off, and now I'm grazing. You know, I hayed early, so was hoping it was good quality. That was a little bit tough this year, and then I took the hay off, and then I grazed it in the fall to try to keep some nutrients there. This is actually that same pasture that I showed at the very beginning. It's actually over the hill, but this is, I'm pretty sure it's big blue stem. Yeah, it's big blue stem as far as I'm learned. It kind of had a funnier head, but I think it was just a little bit younger. But I'd asked the guy that had it before, and he said he'd never seen that before. So I'm moving in the right direction. This was the first time it was grazed, and well, it was kind of flash grazed for a few days at the beginning of the year. But this had been given enough time to show the different variety and the different grasses that are out there. So I'm thinking that I'm going in the right direction as far as that's concerned. This was October 15th. I finally got the pit in so that I could control the well that I thought I was going to have done in June. So that's kind of where that was right on that section. And the reason I did that is because the power is right there, and I was able to find water by water witching, and then so I was able to put the pit right there and put it in, and I thought I was doing pretty good. It's amazing how much work you can get done in a day. That was November 1st. I got all my tanks in and everything done. This is actually not November 1st. This is actually after. To the left, you can see, or above the boarded tanks there, you can see that it was a cornfield across the way there. That's across the fence line, actually. It was a corn stubble field, so I was grazing that corn stubble field, and this was actually in operation then this fall, November 1st. I was able to get them in there, and the tank worked out very well. I was really happy with it, so that actually did work out pretty well. It's a small enough tank that my animals would keep it. I never had trouble with it freezing or anything like that. Looks like I did have some trouble with the cattle getting up to it. I'll have to remedy that somehow. So if anybody has great ideas, let me know. But it worked well. They had good water.
You mean the ice?
Yeah, the ice right by the where they drink.
Sprinkled salt.
Just salt. Okay. And the back tanks there, it's an equip program. So for summer storage, I need the extra gallons for the extra heat and just more drinking capacity. And that's kind of what I did there. This part here, this is actually, I just turned around and took this picture. This is actually a downhill slope, and it's on that same picture that I was showing earlier. But those streaks that you see going, actually going north and south, are what I fed in the field. 2 years ago, I used that hay, and to get that spread out a little more evenly and distributed on the ground a little better, I used a bale processor, which I bought years before I got into holistic management too. But once you got it, you figure, well, sometimes you should use it. But it actually worked out pretty nice because I'm able to spread a lot more manure, and you can kind of do the swath grazing with that. That's kind of the theory I was using. So I can use, what I'll do now is when I have really high quality hay, I'll run that, because then my tail end cattle or forward doers still have access to eat. It seems like if you just put out really good hay bales, the good big fat cows will bulk everybody away, and So you either have to put a whole bunch out or I run it through a bale processor. So this seems to work pretty well. They go back and forth. So I've got like lines of manure, but then I also, once we got enough snow to make windbreaks then with snow, then I would push up snow and then I would feed bales in behind the snow. So I used snow for a snow fence. Before we had snow, this was an experiment that I did. I just took my freestanding panels and took regular snow fence, zip tied it. Zip ties don't work because when zip ties freeze, they break. But it actually did hold up pretty well. Zip tied it to that, and actually it was pretty amazing how well it did work. But once I was able to push up enough snow to make a decent windbreak, they stood behind them more than they stood behind us. Of course, I put this up on top of the hill, so you know, even cattle are smart enough to not stand on top of a hill on a rainy day. So this is kind of what I do now. I kind of do a hybrid of bale grazing. They're still pretty much out on some pasture. This is pasture around a farmstead that I rent. So what I'll do is I'll go and haul out hay for about from 3 to 5 days. I'll haul out hay and try to have a pretty decent mix of both protein, energy, and then pretty much poor hay. This year that's not too trouble to find poor hay. So that's kind of how I do it. I get a mix. I'll feed for about 3 to 4 days, maybe up to a week. It seems like if I try to feed longer than that, they'll really go after the really good hay, and smaller cattle don't do as well on that. That's one thing I'm kind of running into too, is if you have a really good grass animal, she's usually not really big, and when you're feeding hay, those big ones kind of hog it all, and the smaller ones. But if they're out on grass and able to be out grazing, those small ones do way better. So you're kind of in a catch-22. If you're feeding hay, you're kind of going backwards with your good genetics, and well, and if you're not feeding hay, then everybody can get ahead, sort of deal. And this was some stockpile that I had. I want to get more of this. That's the direction I'm trying to move. But this is regular stockpiled hay. I was able to get them into some of it with the amount of head I had. They had to walk about, good half mile anyway, before they could even get to this. But they pretty much cleaned that off before they would even mess with the hay too much. They would eat the alfalfa hay, but more of as a supplement, I believe, to this. And then once that got done, once I realized they were eating other hay, then I knew I needed to kind of start kicking up my amounts of hay to them to keep them going. And with that, I guess that's all I've got. So I'm kind of right on the edge here. So was there any questions, or everybody just want to take a nap?
Any questions today?
Steve?
Slide before we found the stockpile grazing. What is the recovery time? When did you graze that before, or how long was the recovery time before you went back in the stockpile?
Okay, he asked how long the recovery time was on the stockpiling on this picture here. This is actually where I had put them when I first took them down south. So I had put them in here about April 20th. So they grazed that from about April 20th to about May. Maybe it was a little bit later in April. I'm not quite sure which day it was, but it was the end of April. And then that first picture of the cattle moving through that pasture, that was mid-May. So there's actually, this is about 50 acres, and then there's about another 100 acres that's right around the farmstead where this where the bale grazing is here. I was separating the two off and using cables and stuff to sort that out. But yeah, it was pretty much April and the first week in May, and then they were off of this, and it had come back quite, well, it pretty much had all summer. You know, I pretty much just took off all the dead growth and early season grasses, and then through the summer it had all summer to grow. It was taken at the end of October. Yeah.
More questions for Steve? Or, excuse me, Dave? Steve's is drilling.
There is some question people having of what is stockpile grazing?
Well, yeah, stockpile grazing. It's pretty much, and there's other people who probably can answer it a lot better, but stockpile grazing is pretty much where you're just designating a certain area to let grow good. In North Dakota here, it's going to probably take a month or two. It kind of depends on the year there too. But what you want to do is you're just leaving certain areas of pasture that you know you're going to just designate for regrowth, and then you want it to grow back well so that you can graze cattle through and into the winter. Does that sound okay here? Yeah, that's pretty much what you're trying to do with that.
Trying to get rid of cool season grasses, stockpiling help you do that on top of that.
Yes, that's one thing you can do pretty well. If you don't get it taken care, or the stockpile off in the fall, a lot of times you can get them in. In fact, like grass tetany, you know, a lot of people have grass tetany problems and stuff in the spring, and that's because there's no old material there at all, and it's all fresh green grass. If you can have a stockpile, even it wouldn't even have to be stockpiled quite as long as like this would have been, because that was pretty much a whole season that had been stockpiled for mine in the spring. But even some of the stuff you took them off of, say in August or something, would have enough time to have a pretty decent grass, old stuff in there for the spring. Then when that green grass is coming, there's at least some old material there. A lot of guys they'll take them into their pasture in the fall, start feeding or whatever, and then all that stuff is just lush green because everything's been taken off. Well, then that's when you run into the grass tetany problems and stuff like that, because they're getting so much just green in the spring. But yeah, that would work very well.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Good, Dave.